Hi everyone, my name is Kwakye Ransford and I am a minister in the Presbyterian Church of Ghana. And for this Live Theology and World Christianity, the topic that I try to work on is theological justifications and inculcation of African traditional religious practices of clapping of hands and stamping of feet into prayer sessions of the Presbyterian Church of Ghana. The Presbyterian Church of Ghana, as a reformed denomination, has its own ethos and then liturgy of worship. The church believes that worship must not be a form of entertainment nor a performance, but rather it should focus on God and God's glory, to give God the glory that God deserves. Hence, it has three sections which I don't want to go into, or every worship has three key sections that ought to be observed. However, lately some other practices of clapping of hands and stamping of feet have appeared to found themselves into the church, and these practices have been observed to have African traditional background or even New Age backgrounds. You see some church members here so you hear the leader shouting "Bonsimna Bompae," literally meaning clap your hands and pray, and this is part of the nuances in terms of the gestures that are being used in prayers. We just want to understand the meanings of these gestures. Now, this inculcation has sparked a bit of theological debate among clergy and members. Some think it is biblical, others think it is not. Others feel very difficult immersing themselves into this kind of practices. Others think that because it has its roots from the ATR, it ought not to be employed in our worship. Something that when used, it gives honor to other persons, and hence it is very important for us to really understand why they do this and what kind of experiences they get. The study investigated through interviews and relevant literature the theological justifications of clapping of hands and stamping of feet during prayer sessions, and also it also examined how feasible it can be inculcated. And then we want to understand how these practices help members to grow spiritually and also to shape their life experiences or theologies. Now, having a background with respect to the usages, we have African cultures uses the clapping of hands and the stamping of feet. In fact, in Ghana, it has been observed that when two women are against each other fighting, they usually clap against each other, and the clapping is a way to hoot at each other for whatever they've done, and it usually follows with invectives. When somebody is banished from a village or a town, they are usually followed by the town folks or town people clapping their hands and sometimes even stamping their feet whilst this person is being exiled. In Ghana, we have some tribes like the Kasina tribe, and they have a dance called the Nagila. And then the Frafra people also have a similar dance that they dance, and with that dance, they stamp their feet and they do all these things. When you go to Nigeria, it's somehow similar. The Yoruba priest who served the god, who served the thunder god Shango, actually show some actions or gestures to show how wrathful the god is, and they actually roll their shoulders up and stamp their feet to indicate that the god of thunder's power. So some of these things are being used even in New Age spiritual movement. They also think that the feet has some kind of potency of powers that can be invoked by stamping them, and when you stamp there, it invokes a range of deep spiritual energies and is able to shift our mental and emotional state. In certain spiritual practices, foot stamping even is employed to summon transformative energy. So the whole point is that foot stamping, clapping, they all have their background from the African traditional religions and also from the New Age movement. Proponents trying to justify the use of these, when you ask them, they would quote Ezekiel chapter 6, verse 11, chapter 21, verse 14, and then verse 17, and then chapter 25, verse 6, to show that yes, these gestures were used by Ezekiel, the prophet. But when you read the first and the second references, that's Ezekiel 6:11 and the 21:14, you come to appreciate that the clapping and the stamping of feet were used symbolically to express God's wrath against Israel, when we all know that Israel always sin against God and they worship other idols and at higher places. So the text does not explicitly explain why they do that, but it can be gleaned that it symbolically represents God's judgment on them. When you read chapter 25, verse 6, it's quite a bit off, because here it wasn't Ezekiel who was using this symbol, but it was the Ammonites who were using this symbol, clapping of hands and stamping of feet, against the Israelites. So why are they being used in prayer sessions now? Probably there may be reasons that is being used. So we try to understand some of these reasons. So despite the apparent justifications being used, as we've seen from the Ezekiel perspective, it is still important for us to explore their lived experiences from the affective, psychological, and then the spiritual perspective to understand why they still use them, though the biblical justification does not necessarily affirm the usage of these in our practices. So the findings. Now, in a short interview, the director of the PCG's prayer camp at Kokrobite intimated that these gestures are used at the camp for two main reasons. The first one is to express seriousness and exuberance or high spirit during prayer sessions. And to him, these gestures empower and enables members to pray effectively. Also, he says that the gestures also use normally during deliverance services, where it aids in casting out evil spirits or demons from people. And in fact, he narrated that there are instances where when they clap their hands and then sometimes they stamp their feet, you would hear the demons telling them to stop or pleading with them to stop the clapping or the gestures that they are using. So indirectly, these gestures are used to spiritually buffet the demons or evil spirits. Now, when asked about the biblical basis, he still pointed us back to the Ezekiel text. Now, in a separate or another interview, a member of the church also expressed his personal experiences with the usage of these gestures. He opines that the gestures make him active during prayer services, and there are times when services become dull without their usages. So he in fact, foundationally, he laid that claim that they don't involve these gestures for God to answer their prayers. He also went on to also give an experience with respect to casting out of evils when it comes to usage of these gestures, and even try to justify it biblically from the text. He made reference to Luke chapter 10, verse 19, and James 4:7, saying that we have been given the authority to tread upon serpents and scorpions and over all the powers of the enemy. And to him, the gestures that is used in order to trample upon the scorpions and serpents and the power of enemies can be any. And so they think that when you employ clapping of hands and stamping of feet, it's able to attain some of these things. However, it was observed that in the discussions, he conflicted. In fact, all of them conflict deliverance services and then prayer services. So you realize that because both are used concurrently, one usually dovetails into the other. So the gestures used in deliverance services usually see themselves appearing in prayer services. Now, the little challenge is if members must be empowered to pray, isn't that the work of the Holy Spirit, since they are raising the concern that it empowers them to pray? Isn't the Holy Spirit the one supposed to empower us and give us the fortification to pray? It therefore appears that the use of these practices is primarily intended to yield psychological and emotional benefits. And that's what the study uncovered. As members feel that they have truly prayed and are emotionally uplifted at the end of using these gestures. So once they have noted that it's more of encouraging them or uplifting them to pray, then it has a psychological, emotional side to it. And let me say that we didn't get time to investigate thoroughly with respect to the casting out of demons and clapping of hands and demons saying they should stop the clapping and other things. We didn't get time to investigate, but there are instances where these things have happened. Now, can we inculcate them into our worship? Several elements have been incorporated into the Reformed worship, including the usage of drums, languages, and other aspects, making the service more African. And formally inculcating these things will not, or is not problematic, or will not be problematic. However, worship is both personal and communal. Hence, before these things can be inculcated, it ought to be verify whether it can enhance our prayer services or prayer worship, whether it really help us to grow well in their faith. So it is necessary to evaluate their impact on congregation and determine whether they contribute meaningfully to prayer services without causing distraction or distraction. Additionally, in Reform worship settings, we know that they often emphasize in discipline, liturgical practices, and balancing personal expression with corporate or with collective harmony. So it's not because somebody is using it, so automatically it has to be used in the PCG. But rather, what we are thinking is that we need to see the way we can balance the two. How can this lead to the discipline we are looking out for? How can this lead and help us to attain the purpose for which the liturgy has been developed or written? And also, we should also know that church dynamics should also be factored in the sense that we have rural churches, we have traditional churches, we have cosmopolitan churches, and each of these category of congregations have their own set of practices, though in the PCG. And inculcating them, we need to also factor some of these churches and what they believe. Some are high-end churches. The understanding of worship, the understanding of the text is a little different from the traditional and rural congregation. So, in inculcating such practices, it's this dynamism needs to be looked at. Therefore, decisions about incorporating these gestures should be guided by theological reflection, ecclesiastical norms, ensuring that they enhance rather than distract or detract from the core purpose of worship. And the recommendations. It's recommended that these gestures should not be made standard for effective or efficacious prayer, since it has been observed that almost all the prayer sessions describe effective prayers as clapping of hands and stamping of feet. And if you're a member in that church and you don't do that, in fact, you are seen as not spiritual and even sometimes not serious in life. Now, leaders should not compel members to use them. Rather, members must be allowed to express themselves through any means in prayer, provided they do not distract or disturb others. And this is the recommendation I'm making. Members who are uncomfortable with these gestures must also not be stereotyped as lazy and unspiritual, as I indicated. A distinction should also be made between deliverance services and prayer services. I think we need to know we need to make members understand the differences and also what can be done in each of these, so that one activity will not overlap into the other activity and become normalized and then now become a serious challenge for some people in the church. So a careful study should be undertaken. The reason all these recommendations have been given is that the lived experiences of members cannot be abandoned or ignored, as they influence members' growth and understanding of the things of God. Hence, yes, these are nuances coming into the church, but we think that if we really want to inculcate them, these are some of the things we need to consider, so that people who are able to use them in order to enable them pray, in quotes, effectively, probably will use them, and those who find it very tough using them should not be forced, so that at the tail end they will also not feel the service or feel the prayer sessions that area. So we should see how best we go around this, and at the tail end, since the Bible is the central point of everything, we need to walk everything else through scriptures, so that we'll not be offending God on the other side, since not everything traditional can be inculcated in our worship services. Thank you. And then God bless you all.